Well, money is only what you make of it, right? It's your emotion that's attached to money. Because if you put a $20 bill on the table, it's just a $20 bill. It has no attachment to you. It doesn't care about you, right? But the way you view it is what makes the difference. And if there's one or there's 1,000 $20 bills, your attitude towards that pile of money changes. The money's attitude towards you never changes.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
Okay, so welcome back to the show, everyone. Thank you for listening in on the previous episodes. We are now in season 2, and this is Connie Davis, your host of Unlocking Commerce and Business. And today we are talking about situations where the money moves, but it doesn't reach you. And there's a word that I use in commerce all the time. I use the word exchange. But what happens when one side of that exchange keeps showing up, keeps working, keeps building you, and the cash flow never follows? For startups and solopreneurs, mompreneurs, and working individuals who are really earning less than meaningful, viable income, either in a startup business or your everyday 9 to 5, the financial gap isn't just a number problem. It's a commerce problem. It's a community problem. It's a dignity problem sometimes. And today we're going to unlock the conversation around cash flow, not just as a business metric, but as a measure of whether your value is actually reaching you. And I'm really excited about my guest today, Mike Milan. Thank you, Mike, for being here. Mike is known as Cash Flow Mike. And he spent 2 decades helping business owners find money that they didn't know that they had. So today we're going to talk about what that means for the communities that need it most. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, live from San Antonio, it's Cash Flow Mike, right? So, Connie, can you believe this? I can't believe we're doing this, me, because when we had kind of our pre-meeting, I'm like, going, this is going to be a conversation. This is going to be the one that people are going to just stay all the way to the end for.
I am super excited about that. I had so much fun in our pre-interview, just diving into the depths of the work that you've done. And we have so many synergies too. I was like, we have been in different places on the same journey, talking about things that really matter to the everyday business owner. And to have you connect with me and go, hey, let's record a show. I was like, absolutely. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Right on, right on. Hey, let's get to it. Let's have some fun. What do you think?
I think it's amazing. I'm excited, and I have some questions for you about your background. I always love to tell the audience and the listener about why people do the things that they do. Right? We have meaning and purpose, and walking in that meaning and purpose, and having the ability to do things we love, it doesn't make it feel like work. And you told me you came from being a state trooper to being one of the most recognized names in cash flow education. And I am curious, what did that transition teach you about people and how they actually relate to money, especially when in business, sometimes it feels like a foreign language?
Yeah, what a crazy twist, right? That's like it's almost like an M. Night Shyamalan movie. You're like, oh, wait a second, wasn't he a state trooper? Now he teaches math. So it's one of those things that even confusing to me. I used to teach at Wells Fargo. So when you first became a credit analyst for Wells Fargo, I was like the first guy you saw for like 5 years straight. And I used to have some of the students come up and our employees, I guess, come up and go, hey, we want to do what you do. You know, how do we get there? I'm like, going, I don't think you can get there from here. You have to start off by being a state trooper. Then you have to, then you have to run out of money. Then you have to start a business that almost fails. There's all these things that kind of happen to get to this point. And I think that's what makes what I'm doing now so fruitful and so meaningful to me, is because the stories are what help, make the concepts come to life. But Connie, I've got to tell you, I thought I was going to be a state trooper my entire life. I just thought that's what it was going to be, because once you get in a job like that, you just stay. So here's how you leave it. I've got an MBA from Baylor University here in Texas. And I'm sitting there writing the student loan check one day. I'm at the kitchen table writing the check out, going to send it off to the student loan payment. And my wife comes up and says, "Hey, guess what? Our family's going to get just a little bigger. We already had two daughters. She tells me we're going to have our third daughter. I'm looking at the student loan check. I'm like going, oh man, that's not enough. It's not going to be enough, right? So, my family literally outgrew my income. That's kind of what, what happened, right? And I said, well, we're either going to have to start laying off, positions of the family, like everything's
Yes.
performance based. Yeah, you don't make your bed, you don't eat your vegetables, those type of things. Hey, then it comes up on performance rule at the end of the quarter. But no, I left because I literally needed more money.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about when you're saying this state trooper, I can envision Mike, you walking up, you got your hat on, you got your badge on, and I'm thinking, wait a second, I worked at Wells Fargo too. So that's where I started my career. So there's another common thing. And I remember working on these big machines. I was in the ATM processing center. So that goes way back, showing you how we
Yeah.
had envelopes going through ATMs at the time. So that was a
Yeah.
while. Anyway, well, and when you can't outgrow your family because your family is your family, right? But I think
Right.
it's a great story to share with your girls, and I'm sure you have. But I know that you've worked around and with 25,000 business owners, you said. And when you
Mhm.
walk into a room, because you're teaching now and you're like really the educator for those that are working with the clients. And when you walk into that room, though, of founders and solopreneurs, what is what's the emotional temperature around money? And why do you think that so many people are afraid to look at their own numbers?
Yeah, so this is something that we talked about earlier, right? And, and money does have an energy. And
Mhm.
most of the time, when people walk into my course, right, the Clear Path to Cash, when they walk into the seminar, you can feel there's angst. You can feel like they're like, oh man, they're just having troubles. Some of them might not be sleeping. Some of them might be worrying about if they're going to make payroll in 2 weeks, right? There's
Yeah.
all this angst, and you can kind of feel it. Then by the end of the second day, it's totally shift. It's the poles have shifted where it's not angst. There's hope. There's like going, oh my God, I kind of understand what I'm looking at now, and I got a plan on what to do next. So the transformation in 1 or 2 days is just miraculous to see and watch people go from anxiety to hope.
That what I was thinking about is you're a father of 3 girls, you're kind of shepherding them through their lives, and as business owners, we are the father or the mother of a crew, and we're
Mhm.
trying to protect
Yeah.
that, so I can only imagine where that angst comes from for employees and payroll and people that are counting on you to be their leader and to lead them through. They're there to sign on with growing a business with you, and small businesses are the heartbeat of America, and we employ the most people, when you really think about it. So it's an important role and you take it very seriously. And teaching people the way that you do, I think just speaks to your legacy.
Yeah, well, thank you. What's funny is you never realize the impact you have on others. You just
Right.
don't realize it. And for me, from my daughters, it comes back in the form of my own words. I'm like, going, "Oh, you were listening. You were listening. Yeah, something stuck in there. It
Yeah.
wasn't just all TV or whatever. There's something stuck.
And in my work, I spend a lot of time with I try to keep, I use the analogy of water a lot and
Mm,
the current and the change of tides that happens. And it's unpredictable. You could be out in the middle of a storm and that effect, that wave, that ripple effect that hits you is literally what you just spoke. You never really know the impact of your words, your actions, your choices on someone else until you see it hit them. And it can be positive or negative, but the effort is really the same, and it starts with intent. And
oh,
so I really love how you think about that in your leadership, because as we lean into the next question that I have for you about human exchange, I believe that human exchange is not just a transaction, but money gets trapped in that space where it's just a transaction. It's just, here, let me change hands really quick and I bought a thing from you, or I got a service and I'm on my way. But the most loyal customers to a business, and founders and solopreneurs who can't get their cash flow right, what's really being blocked beyond just the dollars when you see that transformation happen in in your workshops?
well, money is only what you make of it, right? It's your emotion that's attached to money. Because if you put a $20 bill on the table, it's just a $20 bill. It has no attachment to you. It doesn't care about you, right? But the way you view it is what makes the difference. And if there's one or there's 1,000 $20 bills, your attitude towards that pile of money changes. The money's attitude towards you never changes. So yeah, money is used for transactions. It's just a tool. It's just going to help you do whatever it is you want to do next. That's why you accumulate money.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that are learning that lesson, especially through their entrepreneurial journey where they're pouring their heart and soul into an idea or into a project, and you go with the flow of what those emotions are around that, but they are running a gauntlet. And I see a lot in underserved communities, Mike, where there's often this gap between the value that someone who's starting a business wants to do a side hustle, needs to do a side hustle sometimes because their dollars aren't stretching far enough. And they're just starting out in this business. And the income that they actually receive from a cash flow standpoint, where does that gap live? And can you do you see it as findable? Like you teach them to find and fill those gaps, don't you?
Yeah. So basically, what I do is I've got this technique called mining your business for hidden cash. And it's about looking at your business from a 3D perspective, right? Two different directions at once. And
Right.
what I mean by that is money is moving. I love your analogy of water, and I use a thing about even people's emotions, where you create an emotional wake behind you sometimes,
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
you don't even again you don't know the impact of what you're leaving behind. So when I'm looking at a business, I'm looking at how money moves in two different directions. One is what I call cash generating activities. You sell stuff, you spend some money, and whatever's left over is called profit. I look at that as vertical math, right? You just keep subtracting things out to the end. The other way to look at it that people sometimes miss, or they look at it separately, is called cash conversion activities. And that's kind of a horizontal view of money, because it's how long does it take? We'll say in days. When I was a state trooper, I measured speed in miles per hour. Now I measure speed in days. How long does, inventory sit on the shelf? How long does it take me to get paid? How long does it take me to pay my bills? The gap exists between money coming in versus money coming out. And usually it's one of these six areas: sales, what you charge, what you spend, how long things sit, on a desk, invoices or bills. We're going to find a place where there's inefficiency, meaning you're not doing it as well as others. And I compare you to the industry average. And that tells me what lever to pull so we can put more cash back in your pocket.
Mm. And that also helps business owners who are riddled with tech, and I use this terminology a
Mm.
lot. You have a technology Frankenstein in your business. And what I mean by that is everybody's trying to connect all of these, systems, a CRM to a accounting system to AI now, and we're having a lot of conversations about how deep and AI flows or doesn't flow and where things break because they don't connect seamlessly from start to finish, which is a horizontal line, not a vertical line. And I think a lot of businesses are riddled with this, the monster of the Frankenstein, which is a technical Frankenstein. And so there's gaps there that slows things down or speeds them up, and then they're not ready where the human parts get in, or there's attrition and they have change in staff. So I think you're speaking to some really very realistic costs that business owners can really look at, and that's actually what's so exciting about the future of money for me, the future of business, which is where we're going with blockchain, tokenization of assets, and all of the things, right? And agentic commerce with AI. So I love this gap. Let's keep going though, because you also coined the idea of growing broke and being growing broke. Excuse me, I got that wrong. So you coined this idea of growing broke and being so successful that you run out of money. What an amazing problem or opportunity that would be, right?
Well, I don't know if I coined it, but I lived it.
Yeah.
Eh, there is a phenomenon, believe it or not. People always think of cash flow problems as, oh, I'm a struggling business. Well, there's the opposite end of that as well, which means you can be so successful that you actually outrun your own operation. You
Mhm.
might have heard the thing like going, hey, it takes money to grow, right? You got to feed the monster to grow. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. when I left the highway patrol, I started a janitorial company, right? That's kind of how it started because, I was in the military. I was a highway patrolman, went to the academy. The only skill I had outside of being a police officer was I could clean. Just that was it. So I said, well, I'll use that. But quickly that transitioned into being a hotel staffing company. It was a really weird listening to the market moment, right? Rather than going out there trying to compete on, I can clean better than they can clean, those type of things. I had one of my clients move into being a general manager of a hotel, and they go, "Hey, listen, what you never have a problem with is finding people. We always have a problem finding people, to make beds and to wash dishes and just be the heart of the house. Can you? We can't hire your cleaning company, but we can hire a staffing agency. Can we just hire some of your people for the day?" I'm like going, "I don't have to do the work? No, we do it all. We got managers, everything." I'm like going, "Yes, I'm in." So I morphed my janitorial company into a staffing company, and that's when everything changed, right? I
Okay.
didn't expect it to, but there was a hole in the market where in hotel staffing, nobody was just fulfilling that need. Right? There were staffing companies, but somebody might work in a manufacturing plant one day and a hotel the next. Me, I only train people to work in hotels. Right. I actually built in my office a hotel room so we could teach people how to make beds and those type of things. Right. It was one of those things where that's all we did. Well, that caught on. I became a preferred vendor of Marriott and we grew fast and unbelievably fast. I opened 27 offices in 9 states in 3 years and
Oh
almost
my.
four yeah, 4 or 500 people working a day, right? Just out there. Well, the routine was you'd go to work on Monday through Friday. I'd get your timesheet. I would create an invoice from the timesheet and give it back to Marriott, right? And then it would sit on their desk for maybe 90 days,
Oh,
two,
it's what
3 months. Yeah, well, here's what happens. I kept growing. Am I going? Oh, it's hard to keep up with the money, right? Because every 2 weeks I have to make payroll. So 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, and I'm waiting 3 months to get the first paycheck. That means I have to make payroll for one, two, three, four, five, 6 times, right? Six times I
no.
have to make payroll. So every time I brought on a new hotel customer, I actually added 3 more months of debt, right? In
Mm,
the form of payroll. So that's how I was growing, but I was growing broke because every new customer meant I had to take on more money, to fund the payroll until I got the first paycheck. That's when I'm like going, oh, now I know what Michael Dell's talking about. You ever heard his famous cash flow quote?
no, what is it?
All right. So believe it or not, Dell had a big cash flow problem. And what Michael Dell, how he described it was we were so busy watching the speedometer that we forgot to look at the gas gauge. And
Mm,
here's what he meant. Sales was the speedometer. He was measuring everything by how fast they could grow, right? How much sales they could bring in. The gas gauge was the fuel behind it. His problem came because, kind of, I don't know if did you ever buy a Dell computer when you had to order it piece by piece?
sure.
Like I want this monitor,
Oh,
this keyboard, this mouse, huh?
no, but my son did the whole gaming thing, and he's trying to manage it with his cash flow and then, like, wanting the pieces, and yeah, so I
Yeah.
went on that journey with him.
Yeah, so it used to be you had to order it that way, and then you would give your money to Dell, they would build your computer and send it back to you, right? But they had your money up front to buy all the parts. Well, when CompuServe and Compaq and USA and all this type of stuff came into play, Hewlett Packard and Apple and everybody else went into the big box stores, right? They had their pieces all put together. They go put it in the big box store, and people instead of waiting 3 weeks to get a computer built, I could walk in and have one in my house that night.
Right.
Well, Dell says we got to do that too, right?
Yep.
So they've never carried inventory before because they used to get the money up front. Now they had to front the parts to get in the big box store and put the computers together and put them in boxes on the shelf and then wait to get paid. This is the same problem I had. So what I'm saying is that even a successful company can have a cash flow problem when they look successful, feel successful, they could still run out of money trying to fund the business.
Yeah, and it's so important because you touched on a couple of areas there about the process and the procedures, right? And just having the foresight to look at all of those pieces. And I do know that, as I've been in the, kind of in the branch with, business owners coming in to do their deposits, to all of the different roles that you'd see on the other side of a business owner coming in to do their banking relationship.
Mhm.
It's really interesting because every single one of those moments comes with emotion. So that comes back to the you can tell when they're stressed, and now we're likely revealing that that's probably this cash flow stress, the growing broke. Like, yes, it's invigorating to have more clients, and you know, it's a validation of my business and the problem that I'm trying to solve and the value I'm trying to exchange. But now I've got this other challenge over here where, like you said, you could run out of money. And that's where managing lines of credit and all of the tools get to become overwhelming for many, many business owners. I want to say that the future of blockchain here, and I'm going to just put a plug in here because I always talk about blockchain and the future of money systems on every episode, is there's a use case here where what we call atomic settlement in that place can be money moving in ledgers at the same time across multiple stakeholders in an ecosystem of economic activity. And what I love about that is once everybody understands what we are trying to do, we could actually have a whole lot less stressed business owners, and business and vendors and producers and suppliers and companies could all be in this same place where atomic settlement is happening and we're not stuck in that 90-day, delay where the business owner ends up carrying the emotional burden and the stress because somebody's procedures and processes over here aren't as fast flowing. And I hear that a lot with farmers. And farmers are the ones that really carry the stress of I just got Walmart, for example, to buy my producer, my vegetables and things. And we saw this really lock up in COVID.
Mhm.
And it's just an example of how a ripple effect happens even in business unintentionally. We're all good humans for the most part. We have good intentions, but it's the systems that are the undercurrent that really create these emotional storms for us. So I never let that leave very far before I really kind of go, well, see that example over there with money? It's another example of emotional um, a load that we're carrying because of systems, and we can design them more intentionally, is my point. So,
Yeah, it's funny when you're designing things intentionally or unintentionally. You mentioned farmers, right?
mhm.
I grew up in a farm family. I remember my grandfather and father, they're always listening to the farm reports in the morning, and I didn't realize then that they're really trying to time the market. When should I load that truck with whatever it is, with the corn, with the beans, with the pigs? When should I load that truck and take it to market?
Yeah.
Right? It's a crazy procedure that they had where they had some trigger in what was being said on the report. And I don't know how to read the farm report, so I don't know. So, but there was some trigger that they were listening for to know the day that they should take that in. Uh,
And that's still happening today. That proof of work, that's their
yeah.
proof of work, right? I'm taking my harvest, my output, my production to the market. That's still happening today in digital assets and digital commodities and digital trade marketplaces. We're not really getting rid of that. That's what Bitcoin introduced again. And we're really starting to think about what is it that we're producing that becomes a form of capital that now creates cash flow for us. So
Mhm.
we're going to end up going back through our basics again, and I think it's gonna really help individuals like you take people back to the basics of cash flow is king, right, for a
Mhm.
business. And we can use all the fancy tools we want to, but at the end of the day, it's still value being exchanged and compensation for that value. So I really love the mission that you are on and the way that you teach. I have another question for you. So I think you said the clear path to cash in plain language. And what does that really mean though? If someone's listening right now and they're one of these micro businesses or they're not able to get to your training for a little while, but they are trying to stabilize this effort of building a business, where do they start? Just as a couple of tips, would you give a couple of tips around that?
Yeah, all right. So there was a couple different things. Let me kind of break up what I think you asked there. I mean, the first one was like the clear path to cash and the language, right? Just in plain language. The first thing I try to do with somebody is let's get on the same page. And I'm not going to use words like liquidity or leverage or solvency because most people don't know what it is. I mean,
That's right.
I teach at the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Colorado. I start off every class, in the summertime when they come in for the residence part. I say, hey, what's liquidity? Almost zero bankers have the answer. Though they might say, oh, it's cash. No, that's cash. That's cash. What's liquidity? And they struggle with being able to explain it. I said, okay, well, that's our first barrier we have to break down as financial advisors or people that are financial professionals is how do I talk to the regular person and get them to take an action? Because the confused mind never buys, it never takes action. It's like it's stuck. It's like, when in doubt, don't type things. So I have to tell people, and this is where I like your water analogy. I tell people said liquidity is about the speed of cash. How fast can I turn something into cash? Right.
Mm.
So I said, look at the balance sheet. If we want things to be cash, and because we're using the word liquid, let's just call that water. We want things to be water, cash. Well, if you look at the current assets portion, which is AR, inventory, other current assets like that, your checking accounts, checking account's cash, but what we're looking at there is I call it the slush, right? That's the slush, which means it's not quite water. I have to collect on an invoice. I have to sell the inventory and then it becomes cash, but it's just not quite water, not quite ice. I call buildings, vehicles, those type of things. That's like the ice because it can also become water. It just takes a little bit more time. So it's the speed of cash that I help people understand what liquidity is because most people don't understand it.
Yeah, and that's really important because those are one of those base terms, and I love how you teach that because liquidity is the reason why we are thinking about as a future of finance, tokenization of real world assets. Because you're talking about real world assets that can be turned into liquidity, but now there's ways to do that in fractional ways, right? So you can't take a building, a commercial building, and liquidate that very easily. You've got a whole, market process. You got to list the property. You got to go through all the processes. There may be, though, extra floors on that. And instead of having an entire warehouse or commercial building sit empty, we can create fractional ownership structures, which creates fractional pathways to liquidity for someone that owns that building. And we can do that on all kinds of assets. And that is where a lot of the work that I do as I kind of help people bridge into the future of finance, this is where we start talking about the root of the words and what is the parallel in the new world, right? So liquidity still exists in the blockchain world. It just
Mm,
exists in, you know, market capital on a particular blockchain or project and who has invested in that project. So it's
mm.
really super cool to think about how you're going to be able to help your students make that shift in the future too. Okay, so that I think that was a really good segue into my next question, which is really around you're analyzing businesses' financial health, and you say that you do that in 7 minutes, right? So, what are those nine numbers telling you, and what's one thing that people completely overlook that's most common?
Yeah, so I've written 3 books, right? The one
Yeah.
that you're talking about is called The 7-Minute Conversation, where I can hear the financial story any business is telling me in 9 minutes or 7 minutes or less. And you're like, "Well, how you do that?" Well, most people, when they come to me at first, they say, "My accountant keeps giving me these reports, and they got an income statement, they got a balance sheet, they got a cash flow statement," and they go, "I don't know what to do with this. What am I supposed to be looking at here?" And I basically just tell them, I said, "Well, I've created a thing called the home run financial system. I call it the home run financial system because it touches all the bases, a little bit from the income statement, a little bit from the balance sheet, a little bit from the cash flow statement." And people are like going, what are they for? I said, well, the income statement is really just, does your business model work? If you sell this much and spend this much, this is what's left over. That's all it is. It's going to tell you if you had a good or bad month or a good or bad quarter or good or bad year, and then it starts over. And I said, how do you think it starts over? How do you get to say, ooh, we blew it in January, but don't worry about it. We'll get them in February. How do you get to start over?
Yeah.
Well, you get to start over because the result, if it's a profit or a loss at the end of the month, it gets put onto the balance sheet in the form of retained earnings. So when you see retained earnings, that's really all the accumulation of all your profit or losses over the years. That's retained earnings, right? So the balance sheet is the culmination of every single decision you've ever made in your business. It is the living history of your business, meaning what you owe, what you own, what you have, who owns part of the company. All of those things are listed on that balance sheet. And a balance sheet is going to tell you if you have a good or bad company. It never starts over, right? It's just a living document. Those 2 are pretty easy to understand when you explain it that way because the income statement is vertical math. Start with sales, keep subtracting out. The balance sheet is vertical math. If I put money in the bank account, the value goes up. If I take money out, the value goes down, right? Those are easy. Then you go to the cash flow statement and people go, "I don't get it." Right? They can't find the transactions that add up. That's because it's not vertical math like the other 2. It's horizontal math, and what you're seeing is the change in periods. I had $500 in the checking account in January, and in February I had $300, so I see negative 200, right?
Mhm.
They can't find the transactions that add up to negative 200. That's because they're just looking at the change. Here's what the cash flow statement is. It is the tattletale of the business. It tells on you. Anybody that knows how to read a cash flow statement, they know where the money came from and what you did with it. Doesn't matter the story you tell them. All you gotta do is look at there. So what I did is I took those 3 statements and created a system of 6 calculations. One is about trends, the relationship of how money moves through. The second one is about, it's called expense control. And expense control is, if I think one of your other questions earlier was, what would you tell somebody new? I said,
Mhm.
there's a hard and fast expense control rule. If you violate this rule, your company will die. That's basically what happens. And people go, okay, what's that rule? Well, the expense control rule is uh, the change in operating expense should mirror the change in gross profit. Now, that's the technical way of saying it. Let me explain it more simply. Gross profit is the most important number on the income statement. It is
Mhm.
the only place you can get money to pay your bills or put in your pocket. You cannot spend sales. Sales is only a measurement of how much work you did. That's it. I just did that much work. Gross profit is where all the money comes from, right? And when you look at it that way, you go, okay, well, that's how much money I have then, my gross profit. Well, operating expense is how you spend it. So gross profit is how much you spend. Operating
Mhm.
expenses, or I'm sorry, how much you have to spend, and operating expenses how you spend it. Well, if you move those at the same level, it doesn't matter how much you sell, you can make the same profit. So I challenge anybody listening, go do like 10 million and have a gross profit number and then do 9 million and a gross profit number and change the operating expense by the same amount and your profit would be exactly the same at 10 million or 9 million. And so the math is this, the change in gross profit should mirror the change in operating expense. When I have less money to spend, I should spend less money. So I tell people all the time, I said, in your household, if you took a $2,000 a month pay cut, would anything change?
Oh,
Right?
it would have to.
Maybe. I mean, you might still make your bills. Yeah, something's got to change. You're not saving as much or investing as much. You're darn sure not going to Taylor Swift concerts, right? 'Cause you don't have
Right.
money for that. But that's the same thing in your business. When you have less money to spend, you have to spend less money. And I say the equal amount. So if gross profit came down $10,000, I have to cut operating expense by $10,000 and profit will be the same. Right? That's the hard and fast rule. If you look at the headlines, like Meta lays off 7,000 people. How'd they come up with 7,000? Not 10, not 25, not 3. How'd they come up with 7,000? Because gross profit, the change in gross profit equals about 7,000 people's salaries. That's how they
Mhm.
come up with that number. Because the role of the manager in the firm is to maximize shareholder value. So what they're talking about is make profit, right? Public companies. And that's how they do it.
I'm sitting here thinking about really the meaning of the words, and if I could break it down a little bit further, it, one of the things that I know that a solopreneur kind of remember the side hustle, so they're trying to start a business. Everybody says start a business, and that way you can have some extra side hustle. You can learn entrepreneur, and then you get some tax credits, right? That
Mhm.
also, in a way, I've seen them use that as an example of, okay, I've got this extra cash flow from the sales, but that underlying current, again, I go back to the undercurrent, is the riptide could be my subscriptions to my business. And I go back to the tech
Mhm.
stack again. That tech stack, those are fixed expenses versus variable expenses. and we're really, getting caught very much like the Netflix subscription and all of the subscriptions for the TV
Mhm.
in house. By the time you add all of those up, there's tools to help you find out what those subscriptions are so you can understand, am I using them in my household? We don't have the luxury of that in the business because in the business, sometimes you need some of those tools and you get caught in those subscriptions of tools, and those are fixed expenses.
Mhm.
Have you seen a lot of business owners kind of go, but I can't get rid of these other tools because of they do certain things for my business.
Yeah, all the time, every day.
Yeah.
Here's the one that really confused me. I There was a $8,000 a year charge that a client of mine was paying. And it was for an old CRM that he was not using, right? Just a
Mm,
CRM, customer relation, had a customer, had their phone numbers and email addresses, communication, sales totals, those type of things inside it. And he kept paying it even though he was using a different product. He wasn't using this one. I said, "Well, why are we still paying that?" He goes, "Because I don't wanna lose the data." I'm like going, "Just
oh,
export the data. Just export it." I said, "When's the last time you got into it?" "Well, about 3 years ago." I said, "Do you even need the data?" I
wow.
mean, there's $8,000 we can get rid of but he was keeping it just because it made him feel safe that he
Mm,
had that information if he needed it. So, uh, one of the things that I learned about subscriptions, and I learned this from a CPA, um, if you have trouble managing subscriptions, like they just kinda get out of control, they're the Frankenstein. He started putting his subscriptions on it's their own account, meaning he got
mm,
an actual, bank account for subscriptions only, and he would only put money in it after he got the failed payment notice for the automatic subscription, because it forced him to evaluate every single month, every single subscription, right?
that's a
He said
that's a fantastic
y
tip.
yeah, yeah, because, I mean, it was just like going it was 0 in the bank account. The payment would come in and go, "Oh, you failed." You know how they retry it 2 or 3 times? It
Mhm.
made him think, "Do I still need it? Do I still need it? Do I still need it?" He says that he cut his subscriptions by 50% just by doing that. Just
Oh, I
things he
love
knew he
that.
wasn't because he knew he wasn't using it. He goes, "Man, I haven't even opened that up in 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever."
Yeah, that's like what the big companies do when they do third-party vendor due diligence, and then they're doing
Yeah.
the procurement quality assurance too with the departments. I love that. That's the best tip I've ever heard. Um,
Yeah.
wow, that's a great one. Okay, so you wrote, "Don't be a dumb business owner." I want to talk about this. Dumb standing for don't understand my business. Where does
Yeah.
that misunderstanding usually start? And is it an education problem or is it an access problem or something deeper? What do you think?
Probably a little both. I mean, every time something's new, there's a struggle period. There's an acclimation period. Dumb came from me sitting at the kitchen table, and I couldn't figure out this cash flow thing. At that point in time, I didn't realize that selling more was actually hurting me, right, in the hotel staffing business. So I'm sitting there like, "Oh man, I'm not dumb. I just don't understand my business." And I said that, you know how something kind of
Yeah,
connects. You're like, "Oh, that actually is the don't understand my business." So, and I'm not telling people that they're dumb. I'm just saying don't be dumb, right? Understand
sure.
your business, what you need to do. Most of the time, it's just education. It's just that they're good at something. They're good at, they ran their father's restaurant for years, right? They can cook, they can sew, they can create, they can build things out of wood. They're good at that. They don't realize the mechanics behind it that operates, the timing of money and how it flows through the business. I like the undercurrent thing that you talked about there. A lot of people just see the sales, and I take the sales and I go pay, for my wood or whatever it is to create, and then whatever's left over I get to keep. Well, it's not whatever's left over. You shouldn't be surprised by profit. Profit is a planned event.
Yeah.
I need to make this much in what I don't call it profit, I call it transferable value. I am transferring wealth from that company to me because that wealth is going to fund whatever it is I want to do next, retire on the lake, or take a trip or whatever it is I want to do next. So becoming undumb, we'll say, is just a matter of learning another language, right? Like Spanish, like whatever. It's what is the business telling me? How do I speak to it and see it through the eyes of the financial statements?
Oh, I love that. And I'm going to borrow that transferring value because in the blockchain space, and guys, this is going back to the fundamentals of words again, right? When you say transferring value, Mike, instead of profit before people, right? We hear that a lot.
Hmm.
Transferring value means I've gone out there and I've produced, I've mined, I've done things that the blockchain is all about the creator space. But when you transfer value, you're transferring value from one wallet to the other wallet. And
Hmm.
that's all that's in between. There's just wallets. And it's a result of, either staking and mining but it's all about value exchange. And so I love that that's where we're headed with the fundamentals coming back to the surface and really rising up to where reminding us all remember our value. And I want to go back to financial literacy for a second because you are doing with cash flow education, that is really economic empowerment because cash flow is the core and the output, the outcome that we all desire from economic activity. But financial literacy gets talked about a lot and it stays in this theoretical, conceptual, some spreadsheets and some rules, right? How do you close the gap though between someone understanding cash flow and actually changing how money moves in their life or business?
Yeah, just exercises. I use a technique called the mini P&L, and the mini P&L strips out the noise. A lot of times when you look at your financial statements, there's just too much there. Believe it or not, because it's every little account, it's every person's salary, it's every all the subscriptions, all this stuff is kind of in the way. And so I use again technique called clear the noise, where I'm going to strip we'll call it the profit and loss statement down to just the main categories: sales, cost of goods sold, gross profit, operating expense, net profit. And we start there. If we can learn that, all the other things are just details. But that's where you're going to see the biggest problems is look at the big picture first, the big numbers first. If there's a problem in one of those, then you can dig into the details to figure out what's actually causing the fire. I built this thing called the FIX framework, FIX. And the FIX framework is find the burning issue, right? There's only 6 buckets of problems in a company, right?
Okay.
If you start to look at a company that way, you're like, "Oh, that's not so big and hairy," right? There's a
Right.
cash flow problem, there's a profit problem, and they're different. Cash flow is about timing, money coming in versus money going out. The profit problem is about your business model. How much do I sell things for? How much do I spend? There's a debt problem, right? Where you actually can be have too much debt or you don't know how to get debt. That's even a problem, right?
Yep.
There's a future problem. Like, how do I get out of this company later? What's it worth today? Those type of things. How do I build value in this company? There's an operations problem where things just feel off. It's like
Mhm.
chaos. It's like something doesn't work, right? It's a process problem there. And then the last one's an education problem where somebody will go, "Hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. What do I look at? How do I start?" So once you know that you find a burning issue, and what I call it the burning issue is, I tell you about the second book I wrote, or the third book I wrote was called "Don't Tell Me What to Do." I tell
Okay.
you
No, I
about that
haven't
one.
heard that. Let's hear
It-
about that
it-
one.
yeah, this one's about conversation, and this is where the fixed framework comes into play. Uh, as a state trooper, I learned how to talk to people on the side of the road with a technique called verbal judo. Right?
Judo.
Yeah, verbal judo, right? It's just a way to get people to be committed to taking action, not compliant, right? Compliant means I'm only doing it because you told me to do it. Committed means I'm doing it because I want to do it, right? There's a
Right.
difference, right, between that. It's the right thing to do. So as a trooper, I learned kind of how to talk about anybody at their worst period in
Mhm.
life, right? It's just one of those things. You become really empathetic to others, believe it or not, when you see them on the worst day, right? You kind of get it. Well, when I left in the 1900s, I left in 1999. I always say that to my kids, like going back in 1999 or 95. They go, "Why you say it that way?" I say, "Because it's kind of funny and I can do it." But
Love
I
it.
ran businesses. Yeah. Yeah. I ran businesses all the way through COVID. And during COVID, we all watched TV, right? So I learned kind of how to transition from verbal judo to the language of business. And during COVID, I had just exited the software company. I was writing books and I really wasn't doing much at the point in time. I was just kind of writing and I guess wiping down my bags from the grocery store like we all did during COVID, right? You're like, "Oh, no, we didn't do that, Mike." I'm like, "I know, we were
No,
dumb."
I did. Or you get them to look, yeah, but no, alcohol wipes everywhere.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we did too. So, anyway, during that time, Courtney calls me into the room. She goes, "Have you ever seen this show?" And I sat down and watched just one episode, and the show's called, Hoarders. Have you ever seen Hoarders?
Have.
Alright, so, I mean, the hoarding disorder is sad to watch, but in the very first episode, I was hooked, and I'm embarrassed to tell you I watched 15 seasons of this thing, but I wasn't watching it for the hoarding disorder, I was watching it for the conversation between the doctor and the person with the hoarding disorder, because I didn't see that relationship anymore. I saw business advisor, business owner. Now, let me explain that. When you s all these reality shows are kind of formulaic, which means they kinda do the same thing every time, it may be a different variation of the story, but its setup's all the same. So, the first scene is always the doctor walking up to the house, and a lot of times you can see the problem, right? It's out in the yard, it's packed up into the windows. The person comes to the door and you see the hoard behind them, or maybe it's up over people's heads. What I thought was interesting is that that is the most tenuous time in that relationship, meaning the person with the disorder standing in the hoard and the doctor who's there to help. I'm like going, man, that's when everything could fall apart. Because if the doctor says the wrong thing, the person will feel judged, they'll feel defensive, they'll slam the door on them, and the show's over. Right? I always looked at that way, right? Because I know what happens in police work when you go up to somebody's door. Same
Right.
thing, you don't know what's gonna happen. So, I started watching what the doctor said, and the doctor would always say something like going, "Hey, tell me what I'm looking at here." Or they might say something like going, "How do you think it got like this?" Am I going, "Oh my god," that just disarmed everything right off the bat. It wasn't judgmental, it wasn't accusatory, and the person with the hoarding disorder all of a sudden goes into, "Oh, maybe it's not that bad. Here's a professional, a doctor, and he's not judging me like my family does," right? It was just a whole
Right.
different way of asking a question, but then I realized that what they need the person with the hoarding disorder to do is say the problem out loud. They need to say that they have that problem. That's the first thing that the doctor's trying to get them to do is that this is an issue. It's a safety issue, it's a health issue, it's whatever. Okay, am I going, okay, how does that work in business? What's the same way? When I look at a set of financial statements, I can see all the problems, right? I have enough experience, probably like you, to see enough problems on financial statements. But I can't tell you these are the problems I see as your advisor. I
Mhm.
need you to tell me what your burning issue is. Remember the FIX, find the burning issue? It's all about not the problems I see, it's about the problem you feel. If I think that there's a big debt problem, but you think you can't make payroll in 2 weeks, you're not gonna listen to me talk about debt when you're trying to figure out how do I get money for payroll next week, right? That's what it is, finding the burning issue by asking you, "Hey, what's going on in your business? Tell me more about that." Can you say it differently? Because once you say the problem out loud, nobody can argue with you. If I tell you the problem, you have a debt problem. No, I don't. I have a payroll problem, right? I can argue. If I
Right.
say, "Hey, oh, sounds like you got a payroll problem." Yeah. Well, then let's start there. It doesn't matter. We'll get to the other things, but I have to start with what's heavy on your heart. I have to clear that noise because you're not going to listen to anything else I say after that. So FIX is find the burning issue, then identify what causes it to burn. If I say it's a cash flow problem, well, what's causing the cash flow problem? I go back to that horizontal, vertical cash generating versus cash conversion activities. And then the
Right.
X is about execute, take an
Execute.
action to actually solve it. So find the burning issue, identify what's causing it to burn, and then put out the fire by executing an action. So that's what we do.
And
That
my
was a long way
biggest
to say fix, right? Yeah, that's the longest fix definition in the world.
It was, but, I wanna tell you something. Because I'm trauma informed, and you don't find very many trauma informed financial kinda consultants like me. It's a kind of a unique model. But when I went into doing the nonprofit work that I did 6 years ago, I started really looking at some tough areas of vulnerable communities, from foster youth to domestic violence victims and human trafficking, and the
Mhm.
reason I bring that up is because there's a supply chain to it. There's a supply and demand cycle that's happening around this. And the vulnerabilities are survival mode. They're in survival mode trying to figure out, how do I get out of these situations? businesses find themselves in that too. And what you just alluded to with the fix method that you described and shared with us, and thank you for doing that, is it allowed me to make the connection to holy cow, that business owner is in survival mode in their mind. No
Oh,
different than I'm
interesting.
hoarding these emotions around a business problem and I can't get my way out of it. I can't navigate. But when we're trauma informed means I understand the nervous system. I understand the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system response that helps me lift myself up and out of a survival problem or a challenge. Because until I get out of that response, that trauma response where there's a belief or there's some kind of an experience that I've made a rule for myself, I'm not going to hear anything that anybody like you or myself has to say. And that doctor
Mhm.
understands that. And so, in an emotional hoarding situation, they are emotionally attached to those items. We see that in the poverty space. We see that in, vulnerable communities where those might be the only belongings I've ever had that I've earned myself. And you can't come and tell me to get rid of those. But I
Right.
have to see that I no longer need them and I'm not in survival and I'm safe. Same thing with a business. So I
Mhm.
really love that you created that because a lot of our money wounds and our money problems or challenges come with us into a business. And I've seen that from the solopreneur into the entrepreneur and they scale their business. And they do that through mentorship with individuals like you. So I really, again, that's why I say I commend you for the work that you're doing because not everybody talks about cash flow. They talk about debt and loans and all of the great products that are out there, the tools and the software. But cash flow is so important and it's so empowering.
I really appreciate that, and I tell you, we remember we had another connection where you talked about your work with nonprofits, and I did the same thing. So I'm sure some of that rubbed off on me in some way, right?
I,
Right.
huh?
I'm sure that I'm a product of my environment,
Yes.
but if you remember, I went up to Seattle when I sold my hotel staffing company. I went up to Seattle and did some work, some contract work with a company called Pioneer Human Services, and just loved what they did. And to me, it was like me giving back, but it was giving back in a way that I thought was super productive for everybody involved, including me. And what I mean by that is their mission is to reduce recidivism, right? So as people are transitioning out of incarceration, they need help, right? They need some, they need the behavioral side, or they need some type of mental health conditioning. They also need housing. They also need jobs. They need skills. They need those type of things. So there's a lot of things come out. I remember one of the first guys I met coming out had never seen a cell phone, right? He hadn't seen one, hadn't used one anyway. He just hadn't seen it, and now he's seeing them everywhere as he walks around. Same way with people with ATMs. Sometimes they hadn't seen an ATM and understood exactly what it was used for.
Yeah.
Well, my job was just creating jobs, right? Because it was a social enterprise, and we talked about that. Where if you're not familiar with social enterprises, it's where I'm running a business, and my part of the nonprofit is actually giving back in the form of a business. So they had restaurants, and what I created for them was a labor services company, right? Because I just come from a staffing company. We created a hotel, not a hotel, an apartment maintenance training program where I actually took people through a 9-week training program and then got them jobs at apartment complexes around doing turnovers. As people would move out, they could go in, rehab the apartment, and let the new people move in. And then lastly was a pest control company, pest detection. And what was interesting about that is we actually flew people down to California to get them trained in bed bug sniffing dogs.
Mm.
'Cause Seattle had a big bed bug problem, so we had a whole pack of dogs that were trained to smell bed bugs, and we had contracts all around the city to go in, every month or every quarter and just look for bed bugs that had started because we could catch it fast. And these were jobs that anybody could do, right? They were safe jobs, we'll say, that anybody could do. You could be trained to do it pretty fast, where you could feel like you were contributing back and supporting yourself.
Oh, I love that. And social enterprise, I think there's more and more social enterprises popping up here in Florida because of the recidivism rate. Well, right here in Hillsborough County, actually, Mike, we have the highest recidivism rate in all of Florida. And
Mm,
so those social enterprise shops, in fact, 2 episodes ago, 3 episodes ago, I had David Caldress on from Hope Services of Florida, and
come on.
they create vocational training programs working with employers like you that are willing to give some second chances. And they don't just have, second chancers. They have people with ADHD. They have people that have been injured and now have, deficiencies with their physical movement. They are completely cognitive ready to work and willing and able to work. And they just aren't seeing the opportunities with the jobs. And we need more employers like you that believe in the power of social enterprise to pair up with some of these nonprofits that are doing social enterprise, like lines of business within their organization.
Yeah, it was one
Yeah.
of the things I think, as a state trooper, it helped me understand they're just people, right? They're people that need help. Right? They need help. They need somebody to do it. So,
Yeah.
what I try to do is create the jobs to give them the ability to reintegrate and feel good about themselves as they come back into society.
Oh, you mean dignity? That is such a powerful,
There you go.
powerful move.
That's the word I was looking for, right there. Boom. You saw me searching for it. I'm like, oh, where's the word? Where's the word? Yeah, that one.
No, that's
That one.
that's uh that's what it's all about. That's what these communities need. And I want to ask you just because I know, you've shared as we've been on this episode now, sharing some of these movements of thought process for you and how you've really put it into every lesson or every story becomes something of where you go in the future. If you could redesign financial literacy education from the ground up, starting at the community level, not the corporate level, what would that look like for you?
It was starting junior high school. If I could redesign it, right? Just make
Yeah.
I mean, I've got younger daughters right now, 19-year-olds, my youngest, who we still don't believe she sees value yet. Right? Yeah, understands how money's created or, how you earn money, how you use money, what happens next. So it's one of those things where I think we all are lacking the basic foundation when you come out. Now, when I went to high school, we had a personal finance course as part of our sophomore year. It was a trimester, but the only year that you had a trimester, not a semester. And that's
Mm.
because they made you go through driver's ed, personal finance, and then a health course, right? And you just rotated through one of those three as the sophomores did. Why are we not doing that anymore? I mean, we got terrible drivers. You gotta go get private driving lessons, for sometimes or do it yourself. Uh,
Yeah.
they're not understanding money. They're finding themselves in way too much debt. There's an issue with just basic education. And the system, I believe, is kind of set up against people when it comes to debt. Think about
Mhm.
this. Your FICO score, you can't get a FICO score unless you have debt.
That's right.
You can't get it, right? Which
Goes to
means
credit.
yeah, you can't get debt until you have a FICO score. It's like a weird thing that kinda happens up front, and the more debt you have and the longer you have it, the higher your score is. Well, I was listening to Dave Ramsey, and he says, "My FICO score is 0," right? Because he doesn't believe in debt, and he pays it all down. He says, "That has caused me a lot of problems in society." I tried to rent an apartment. This is Dave Ramsey. I tried to rent an apartment for my daughter when she went through college. I couldn't do it because I didn't have a FICO score. He goes, I had enough cash to buy the apartment building, but I couldn't rent an apartment because of it. I had to go get some special, approval from a manager to do that. So there's things that make it difficult to maneuver in society from a debt perspective, from a bank account perspective, and I think it has to start earlier. That's where I would start with it.
And I'm so aligned with you on that because there is a good news is there is a new scoring system that is looking more at cash flow and how do you pay your rent, and I think it's called the Vantage score. So there are some
Mm,
change approaches to that FICO score model and those
yes.
databases for bureaus. So there's at least good news there because they do see the problem. But I do think that the what value actually means. I mean, I did the Great American Teach-In a couple years ago with 8 and 9-year-olds, Mike, and I asked them, My whole lesson was on the past, present, and future of money and what is the history of money to see if they knew their version of money comes off the debit card. They don't know, that money is actually, I'm like, where does money come from? It comes from my mom's debit card. That's what they're using at the store. So we've done
Yeah.
a really good job at making money invisible, but we haven't done a good job as really showing how do you actually produce capital and then use the tool that is money to exchange that value of capital of whatever you've produced. And I'm getting ready to, Paul's episode goes live next week. Paul Moosen wrote a book called Capital Offense and why some benefit at the expense of others, and he
Mhm.
really is a self-taught economist. He's an award-winning investor, and he saw this, macro challenge around investing in debt and how private capital wasn't moving into the market at the right time and started really looking at it. 6 years later, he pushed out this book, and it was fantastic. Might be interested to read that. So I do agree with you. We do need to teach value exchange. We need to teach effort and production as early so that the youth understand that it's not just sitting around with an attention economy of using your time watching videos or making videos. Maybe that is part of the future is I'm producing something, but I have
Mhm.
to build and go through a whole lot of value building to create a community to monetize on someone else's system. And that's web 2 into web 3. So it's a whole nother conversation for another day. But
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
yeah. So, wow, we've covered a lot of material today, and
Oh, wow.
we're going to wrap us up, but we talk about commerce here as the full exchange of human value. And my audience is really getting to know this. It's starting to rank. I'm really grateful for the listeners that are tuning in because it's not just money that commerce is made of. And Mike, as you showed, cash flow finally, when it finally starts working for someone who's been kind of locked out of understanding it, understanding like how to identify it, how to fix and execute it using your algorithm or your method, that ripple effect in their life and in their community. What's one word, if you could give that one word to what you've seen at the end of that workshop that you described at the beginning?
I still think it's hope, right? People come right out of it, and they are hopeful of what they can do next because
Yeah.
it's just something kind of clicks. They feel not only competent, they feel empowered now to go out there and actually make a change for themselves and not feel under the burden of all the extra stuff around them.
Oh, well, hope is a powerful word in so many ways more than just money. And it's the human essence of hope that keeps us pushing through on even the roughest days. So thank you for carving out time from your day, Mike, to stay and talk with me. I'm so excited we had this conversation, and I can't wait for the listeners to hear it too. So if you're listening, thank you for tuning in, and check out Mike's work, especially if you're a new business owner. Find his books. We'll put your website in the show notes. So,
Okay.
but thank you
Yeah.
again.
Hey, Connie, great. Man, this thing flew. I really appreciate you. Great conversation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll see you again soon.
Alrighty.
Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.